Talking to Dr. Brad Meyer of the SFA School of Music, and curious to know what has changed. What have you been up to in this COVID era in your work with your students?
Yeah, this has been a challenging transition, as it has been for pretty much everyone in education. And so it was kind of daunting to get into, especially coming right out of spring break. And, most of the students had gone home. And with percussionists, they don't take instruments home. They don't have marimbas, xylophones, timpani, anything at home. So it was a real scramble from day one. And so, I'll say that the students did awesome. The end result was, that we got a lot accomplished. It was just in a different way than we would have if we were face to face. So it kind of came down to some quick thinking about what we could do. And so it was kind of let's see what you got at home, whether it's snare drum pads, whether it's a $100 drum set that they've had since they were in sixth grade, bell kits. I've had kids using iPads that have little piano keyboards on them to work through some different exercises and scales and just pitched content. So it's basically everybody's lesson changed, and we just had to kind of figure out what they had and what we could utilize to move forward with any kind of musical instruction. And my thought behind it was, if we can get them playing percussion stuff, that's great. Drum pads are not a great, but they're a good substitute for snare drums. I had a student who owned his own set of tenors, from marching band. And so I said, hey, let's put a towel on those. Let's, tune them a different way, and let's use them as timpani. And so we played timpani on tenors. And then we had one student doing a piece called Ray-Bons, which is a multi-percussion piece. And he didn't have anything that would substitute for the instrument. So he got electronic drum kit pads and put them on top of a bed in kind of the spots where those instruments would have been. And so he just kind of made do and learned the piece to the best of his ability with what he had. I have a master's student who had a recital this semester. And fortunately, she had a couple instruments, but she had a multi-percussion piece, and she had to go to Lowe's and buy some pipes and some 2x4s and all sorts of stuff to help get her set up and playing this really seminal piece of music called SFA. So there's been a lot of adjustment, but I will say that all the students did a fantastic job with just kind of going with the flow. And what I realized is that while it wasn't the perfect learning environment, I think that a lot of students enjoyed the kind of distraction from all the COVID scariness. And, I feel like they still learned some things. And while it may not have been, solely percussion centric, it was music centric. And, I preach to my students, I don't care if you're a marimba virtuoso by the time you leave here, but you need to have good problem solving skills. You need to be able to teach yourself. And I think that this was a great crash course into being flexible and learning how to learn.
Yeah, I was about to ask a jokey question about whether anyone was banging on pots and pans, but if you had a student actually go to the hardware store to get stuff to make instruments, it sounds like it came pretty close.
Yeah. And the fun part about the percussion and general music community is that as soon as everything happened, there was like a slew of resources, people designing exercises for pot and pans. There's one person that designed a marimba, 4-mallet marimba kind of technique packet called Floor Party, which was, doing 4-mallet marimba stuff on the floor. So, there's lots of things that we kind of got into this semester that were just a byproduct of people being super creative, whether that be students or instructors. And we had to get very creative ourselves. So it was a learning process, one that I hope we don't have to redo. But we got the most out of it that we could, and I think that hopefully the students feel the same way.
Did you find some interesting opportunities for collaboration nationally or internationally with faculty colleagues at other institutions?
There were a couple things that I did personally. I gave a couple clinics at some universities in Virginia and Florida, a couple other states that I can't remember. I did a few of them, but it was a nice opportunity to kind of virtually tour around a clinic that I've been doing on health and wellness topics. And I see a lot of programs around the country kind of doing their studio class, which is usually like a once a week meeting where students would perform. A lot of the people brought in guest artists, so it was great to be a part of that. I didn't want to go that way. I thought that was something that the students were, especially with bad internet, would have a hard time doing at SFA, and so what I kind of ultimately ended up doing was having kind of a seminal repertoire watch assignment or class, or whatever you consider it, and just finding those pieces in the percussion world that we don't get the chance to expose the students to often enough. Things by John Cage or Steve Reich, big pieces that last an hour that we just, when you cover that in an undergrad degree. And so I thought that this would be a great opportunity for the students to experience those pieces and other pieces like it that, we just don't get the chance to check out. And then I have them do some kind of listening assignment, review assignment that talks about some kind of information about the piece, whether that's about the composer, about the piece itself, about maybe the group that played it, because usually these pieces the pieces I chose were formed by really significant groups like SFA Percussion, by Third Coast Percussion, groups like that are really big in the percussion world. So hopefully they got to see a great performance of a great piece and then learn some detail about the piece or the composer or the group, and just have something that they could take from this, because our studio class is usually a performance-oriented class where students will play one at a time, but it's also a great class where students get to listen to new repertoire, get to hear repertoire they've already heard in a different way. So it was, I didn't choose to do the national, international, Zoom sessions with clinicians, because we already had quite a few clinicians come in this past year. So I kind of chose a different route, and I'm really happy with what the students kind of came out with from it.
You mentioned one student that needed to do a recital. What technology was involved there, and what were you really able to hear in her music?
Yeah, well, we had two. We had a senior, but fortunately his recital was going to be right after spring break. So we just had him record his whole recital while the buildings were still open on campus. And then the committee just watched it virtually. But yeah, with my master's student, her recital was 3 days ago. And so we kind of stuck to that deadline. That was kind of how we mapped out the repertoire, the learning process. And so with her recital, I kind of wanted to approach it less as a concert hall recital and more as a kind of YouTube video library creator. Something that I think is really helpful for students is to have a lot of individual YouTube videos of their marimba playing, multi-percussion, snare drum, everything that they can, so that as they're progressing through their degree, especially as a master's student looking to go to a doctorate, they have videos that they can share showing their work in their master's, because as a part of a doctoral application, you only get, 20 minutes to audition for the panel that's auditioning you, but you can always send further content, send hyperlinks to YouTube videos. And so I thought that this would be a great opportunity for her to start building what I call a video resume. And so she just single takes of each piece and did them in her apartment. And so it was, a very neat kind of setting for her to be playing in. And she was able to borrow a marimba from SFA that we kind of checked out for her, since she did have a recital. So she had access to some good instruments to play on. And, we learned a lot about recording audio this semester, not just with her, but with other students. I had quite a few students purchase things like USB microphones and learned how to set them up in the right places and, work on not distorting the sound. So with her and with a lot of other people, we had a lot of, learning how to be very amateur audio and video editors.
Well, thank you for your creativity and resourcefulness in keeping the teaching and learning going and keeping the music playing. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted the world to know about what happened in the second half of this semester?
It was just a whirlwind. I don't even know. It was just great that, I was really surprised but not surprised by the students. I thought that this could be a recipe for disaster, knowing that students, especially the percussionists, just would not have maybe real instruments to play on. And instead of using that as a excuse to not get better, a lot of them just said, okay, here's what we got. And they worked on it and they used it as a way to stay involved in school. And we continued to have weekly lessons and we continued to have them do their daily practice. And I think that that helped them kind of cope with this really extraordinary situation. And so I would just encourage people to, if anything like this happens in the future, keep the scheduled instruction, keep the weekly goals, because I have a lot of students right now, it's finals week, and they're like, I did not work on anything because I didn't have the motivation, and now it's all due. And I think that musically, the percussionists have done great, and they just kept doing their daily practice, their weekly lessons, and now we're ending, and I'm doing all their juries right now. They just submitted yesterday, so we're taking the time to watch those as well. So just keeping the regular instruction, trying to keep school as normal as it is during the regular face-to-face semester.
Well, that's outstanding. Very inspiring. Thanks for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.